everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Turning Uncertainty into Bold Action. My name is Liz Weaver, and I'm the co-CEO of the Tamarack Institute. It's my pleasure to introduce to our discussion our guest for today, Deanna Renner. Let me read your bio, Deanna, so that the folks that are listening learn a little bit more about you. Deanna is the director and co-founder of the Unchartered Leadership Institute. In her work as a leadership educator and organizational consultant, Deanna weaves together adaptive leadership, adult development, and complexity theory to develop capability for success in complex, uncertain, and changing environments. She is passionate about creating experiential learning opportunities for people to make progress on real social, business, and environmental issues. Deanna has facilitated leadership development programs within Australia and internationally, including as a guest faculty member with Harvard University Kennedy School of Government and the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. Welcome, Deanna. Oh, yeah, we're really happy to have you join us today and to share your wisdom. What I didn't mention in that quick introduction is that you're also the author of 2 books, Not Knowing and Not Doing, and we're going to talk more about them in our conversation today. But I wonder if you could share something that you'd like to share with our listeners about yourself. What would that be? How would you introduce yourself?
That's a very good question, Liz. Thanks for asking. I often start with my story because I think my background, my history has had a huge impact on my work, on my life, and on my capacity on the way I see the world. And that really started back in communist Romania in the 70s, growing up in a communist totalitarian regime. So my experiences in that period of time were informed by a very authoritarian, top-down way of life where everyone was pretty much controlled by the government. So when my parents in the middle of the night woke my brother and I up, I was 16, and packed us up in the back of the car and drove through to the border with Hungary and then beyond. That's when my life changed from pretty stable yet uncomfortable way of living in those sort of conditions to a lot of uncertainty. So moving from certainty, control, pretty much the status quo, to a life of change and a lot of adaptation. First in Austria, living as political refugees, and then moving to Australia, where I've been living for the last 30-something years. So that experience has really given me a lot of understanding, I think, of change, of uncertainty, and has made me a lot more sensitive and compassionate towards, I guess, the plight of refugees and minority groups around the world. So I've always had a very deep interest in the work that not-for-profit organizations and community-based organizations do. And so I feel really honored to be introduced and invited to speak with you and everyone here today about my work.
What an interesting story. And I can see how it has actually played a really important thread in both the research that you've done, but also the kind of the books that you've written about leading to uncertainty. And I would imagine that, in the current times that we find ourselves, these kind of themes reprise themselves over and over again.
Definitely. I think one of the key things that I've always thought through my experience is that there's no certainty, not a lot of certainty. And I think the current situation has just shown how much of an illusion certainty is. And it's really challenged all of us to find better ways, new ways of working and living in these conditions.
So let me go into our first question. So you, as I mentioned, you've co-authored 2 books, Not Knowing and Not Doing. In the book, Not Knowing, you and your co-author, Stephen D'Souza, explored the concept of not having all the answers. And the fact that often when we're trying to, I guess, control uncertainty, we try to jump to solutions really quickly. And you see that, I see that over and over again in the collaborative groups that I work with. What motivated you to write those 2 books?
Well, I was at the time working as a leadership consultant and working with a variety of groups and organizations that were really challenged by how to develop their people. And often I came up against the same issue that you've mentioned, where, sort of dumping of solutions, the quick fix, the perspective or the reaction of looking for an answer, any answer. And that pressure to know that a lot of people who are in authority positions, the leaders, of organizations, there's so much expectation on these people, on us to have the answers. And so that burden can put a lot of pressure to either pretend to know or to jump to solutions too quickly. And so I was really interested in what can we find, how can we explore new ways, better ways, more productive, effective ways of actually working with those big questions that organizations, communities grapple with. The questions that don't have an answer, ready-made answer, that require us all to work together and to explore, experiment, and approach these problems in a way in which can help us be better at solving them, at making progress. So when Stephen and I met at Harvard University in 2013, it's not that long ago. It does feel like a long time ago. We connected around our personal experiences as well as our professional questions around how do we help people become more effective. And that's what started the conversation. And then very quickly we went on to do the research and to publish the first book.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I've read the book Not Knowing, and what I found really interesting about that was the vignettes and the stories that you thread throughout the book, right? That you share with the folks that are reading the book real-time stories about people that actually didn't jump immediately to answers, but actually spent time, asking better questions about the experiences that they were having. I found that to be a really powerful and quite insightful. Is there a story in Not Knowing that for you is very provocative or stands out for you?
Look, there are a lot of stories. We really wanted to go quite wide in what we offered as examples of both what doesn't work and also what potentially could work. And so, as you know, the first part of the book focuses on all those challenges that people have in their roles. And there's one particular story that stands out of a manager. Well, she was actually a director level in a European financial institution. She was the chief learning officer of this huge financial organization. And so really on her way up to be considered, potentially the next CEO. The challenge this lady had was around her pressure to control, her tendency to control. And so the chapter is called The Leader Who Knew Too Much, because she was smart, she was clever, she was competent. And what really woke her up one day to what she was actually doing was a 360-degree report that she got from her peers and her managers, and giving her feedback on what her performance. And even though that actually illustrated that she was 100% competent in her work, people really hated working with her. And they hated working with her because they felt that she was controlling every single, micromanaging basically their work. And she was jumping into telling them what to do, to the point that she was depriving her people of the ability to learn. And so her assumption, which she really came up against very quickly, was that people needed to be told what to do, especially in periods of uncertainty. She felt like if she could help them, she could tell them, then they would feel better. It was ironic and paradoxical in a way that actually what she was doing was actually taking away from them the ability to make their own decisions, to learn and to grow in the jobs they had. So that really shifted her perspective and gave her the ability to be a better manager, a better leader. And it required a lot of humility in the moment to realize that what she was doing was actually the jumping to action, jumping to control was detrimental to her people and ultimately to her organization.
That's an important kind of lesson for all of us to learn, is having the right balance of, you know, engaging people in being part of the solution, but also providing some kind of leadership that is required, right? And it's a very interesting balance. Across the two books, what are themes that emerged for you and for Stephen as you began to write the two books? What were some of the key things that you thought were important elements for all of us to consider?
We spent quite a lot of time researching what happens to us when we don't know, because we had a clue that actually getting a bit more understanding of how we react to uncertainty. And you can actually see so much of this in the current context, the pandemic and different countries' responses and individual responses to this, that those reactions often get in the way of us being present to what is unfolding, what is happening, and the ability to understand, to diagnose, so to speak, what is going on for ourselves and for others. That ability can then better inform how we act, what we actually do. And so those reactions gave us a lot of material to work with in helping people really almost like self-diagnose. Am I the kind of person who jumps to action too quickly when I'm being challenged with when I'm grappling with a big question? Or am I the kind of person like I'm more the kind of person who steps back, but so much so that sometimes I forget to engage back again. So that balance that you were talking about is really important, that it's so hard to achieve, when we all have our own reactions and preferences. So that was the first thing. And the second thing, which it was an unexpected insight that came from a poet, an English poet, John Keats. He wrote a letter to his brothers in the late 1700s, early 1800s, about a person that he truly admired, and that was William Shakespeare. And he identified this quality of Shakespeare's that he called negative capability. That negative capability is that ability to, what he said was, dwell in mysteries and doubts without irritable reaching after fact or reason. So that ability that irritable reaching that we often have to control, to do, to solve, gets in the way of our creativity and our ability to solve our problems creatively. So that negative capability then forms informs the rest of the book. What are those negative capabilities? What can we nurture in ourselves and in others that can help us be more effective in these periods of change and uncertainty?
It's really interesting, and really thinking about, how do we kind of think about our creative capabilities, right? And yeah, negative capabilities, and then the other side of that, I think the creative capabilities. Both you and Stephen followed up the book Not Knowing with a second book called Not Doing. And so I think it's challenging to lean into the space of not knowing, but the space of not doing is even more challenging, right? Because I think many of the folks that are listening to this webinar are people who are paid to do, who are paid to act, who are paid to solve problems. And the book Not Doing, the secondary title is The Art of Effortless Action, which I find very interesting. So what kind of motivated you both to go one step further and to really think about this not doing component?
Yes, we really had a lot of fun with the first book, and we love the idea that we love the idea of being a bit contrarian, looking at the flip side of something. So with not knowing, we wanted to challenge the perception that not knowing is not about ignorance, but actually it's about a different kind of knowing, a different kind of engaging with problems, thinking about problems, diagnosing problems, exploring possibilities. And with not doing, it was the same contrarian idea that actually it's not about doing nothing. We need action is so important. It's what kind of action that we were interested in. It's not a mindless action that comes out of fear or a reaction to something that we're not even aware that it's sort of controlling us, but actually action that is embodied, that is mindful, that is beautiful, because it's beautiful because in not an aesthetic way, but in a way that is good for the world, that is actually, taking into account not just that instant gratification that we often get through engaging with the media or, that quick fix that we feel good, right? We feel good. But actually what we're looking at is a longer term perspective on what our actions, what are they for and who are they for? And are we taking into account future generations? Are we taking into account the whole system, the whole world, rather than just our part in it? So that not doing is really a different way of looking at, again, that negative capability. It's not negative in the negative sense of the word. It's actually saying that we need to take something away. What we're taking away from not knowing is the biases, the grasping for certainty. With not doing, what we're actually saying we are not doing, we are not that irritable reaching. Again, we're not quickly jumping into action without truly stepping back and engaging with what is. And then when we are acting, we're actually going with what is going on and being mindful of what we're doing. So there is a different perspective on both of those that we wanted to capture.
It really is about kind of the reflection piece that we really need to engage with, right? That giving ourselves permission to take time before jumping immediately into the action, and really, maybe asking ourselves even more questions. What are we seeing? What are the patterns that are emerging? Those kinds of things. And before we, get into that effortless action of doing it. It kind of reminds me at Tamarack, when the pandemic kind of happened in early March, we actually spent a couple of weeks trying to figure out internally how would we respond as an organization to the pandemic, and then took a much slower kind of strategy of reflecting back to communities what they were doing as opposed to jumping immediately into action. And so it's interesting to me to take what you've just said and to kind of look at that thread and to really give ourselves the time and the space to be really reflective about, what is happening around us.
Yeah, that's a great example, Liz. And I think that, actually being able to do both. Some people think that we either have to think or to act. Actually, what I'm interested in, and that's where, again, where that art comes in, is how could we act mindfully, and how could we, what are some of the ways in which we can pay attention whilst we're acting? So almost like being both on the balcony and the dance floor at the same time, if you know what I mean by that metaphor. So we're not either not engaging or fully on. There is a tension between those two. But I mean, I can imagine the pressure to act quickly, especially in a crisis, is really, really strong. And so sometimes we have to act immediately, you know, put out a fire, send support, packages, or, you know, big practical things you need to do in an emergency. I'm not talking about acting in an emergency. I'm more interested, and I think both books are looking at the longer term complex challenges we are grappling with in our communities and our organizations. The kinds of challenges that we would rather, well, either quickly fix, or they're so challenging that they're on our long-term to-do list, you know, that we might get to one day, or the ones that we're not even noticing because they're so big and so sometimes so unconscious, and we're unaware of them, that we're not actually aware that they exist, and we're actually grappling with them, you know, unconsciously.
Yeah. Or we're so busy acting that we're not looking at the complexity of the root of the problem, and really thinking about those, right? We're trying to solve something, but not spending enough time in terms of the root. The next question that I have is, what are the benefits to people and to organizations of not doing? What can you tell people in terms of really thinking about, you know, slowing down and being reflective?
Yeah, so well, not doing is about so much more than slowing down and being reflective. And one thing that comes to mind that I think we could all do better is the ability to let go of our preconceived ideas and judgments. Because I think that, again, our mind, as we know, takes shortcuts. So we see something and we instantly label it, and we instantly judge it, and we instantly need to know it, right? And that ability to let go of our preconceived ideas and to see things with fresh eyes, to be almost like a beginner, even in the things that we know best, right? So we're all experts in a field. That's one of the hardest things we could do. But the more we can open up our perspective and the more we can become aware of our preconceived ideas, the better we can become, again, to look at other perspectives, engage with other views, and also see things with fresh eyes. So because complexity by its very nature, you know, is evolving, it's dynamic, it's generative. You think you know something, and then tomorrow it will look different. Something else would have happened, or it would have morphed into something else. And there are so many different perspectives and angles on a problem, as you know, with your work. Collaboration is such a complex thing to be working with, to be working with, to be engaging in, to be teaching others, that you really need to think about, well, how could I be wrong? You know, not only how could I be right, but actually how could I be wrong? What else am I missing? And how can I let go of what I think is right in this moment? You know, so our viewers today, our webinar viewers, may already have their preconceived ideas about what we're talking about. Them, based on what I've said and based on what I've offered as my answers, there would already be judgments made, good or bad, you know, or ideas about what I'm actually about. And I think that, you know, so the challenge would be, how can you let go of your preconceived ideas? Can you suspend them for a moment? Can you actually see me, or see Liz, who you know much better than me, with fresh eyes, as if we're all mysteries to each other? Imagine if you look at your problems as if they were mysteries, or the people you're working with as if you saw them for the first time. I wonder what would be then made possible.
That's wow. That's such a way of kind of entering into a space, right? And saying, you know, let's pretend I don't bring my biases or my preconceived notions, and let's just listen authentically to this conversation and think to ourselves, what am I really hearing Deanna say? You know, yes. What is Liz really talking about, and how's the conversation going back and forth, and then what's relevant to me and to the work I'm doing right now? Yes. Yeah, such a great way of thinking about in a very practical way of thinking about, you know, entering into a space. So we're still navigating our way through this pandemic. I know that in Australia, in Melbourne, where you're from, you've just been hit with, I think, a little bit of a second wave, and we have lots of conversations in Canada about that. What has changed, do you think, during this time? And how how can we use the ideas behind not knowing and not doing as we engage with folks in this kind of new world that we're in, working from home often, working virtually often, you know, not having the same things around us that that we have had in the past. So how can we bring this into, you know, the time that we're all kind of experiencing together?
You know, and right now in this moment, in this question, I feel the pressure to give you an answer, right? And this is what I'm writing about. This is what I'm practicing in my work, acknowledging that pressure and that expectation. So I could, you know, there are lots of ways I could answer this question, right? And the reality is, I don't know. The reality is that I don't know what to tell you about actually what the world needs right now. I have a view, I have an opinion, but I'm not sure whether actually what I have to offer right now in the moment. I actually have more questions than answers. And so the challenge is really for me to really deeply listen to other people and what other people are struggling with, because from my perspective, my point of view, you know, I only have a sliver of what is my reality right now. And I know I live a privileged life. I have a secure home. I'm educated. I'm still employed. You know, there are so many privileges that I have that give me limit the way I actually see potentially what is happening for others. What has really struck me in this situation is what is called, what I think is called in psychology, ambiguous loss. That idea that, you know, we're changing and we're letting go of something is changing in the world, whether it's Melbourne or, you know, in Canada. That sense that we're not even sure what we're letting go of. We're not even sure yet what we're losing. That loss is still unfolding for all of us collectively and individually. And because it is so ambiguous, we're not sure what we're adapting into, what the world is becoming. It's very disorienting. It's confusing, it's disorienting, it's destabilizing. And almost like I feel like we need to stabilize. We need to create this, stabilize the container, the environment, to create a container for us to hold each other and not be in this turmoil, because I think there's so much turmoil still. There's so much, so many reactions, resistance, confusion, you know, pain and suffering. It's really hard to know what the best way forward is. But, you know, and it will be almost like it's empty words to say we need to be more compassionate. We need to be more, you know, empathetic. We need to listen better. We need to be more generous towards ourselves and towards others. I mean, those things have always been needed in the world. It's not just now, but it feels like, especially now, that ability to be present, to slow down, to hold each other and hold ourselves is even more important. And again, it feels like it's coming from a very privileged place to be saying these things.
That's I think a really good answer to that question. I think you're absolutely right in terms of, you know, feeling more compassionate for each other, feeling that compassion. And maybe it's just asking people, how are you? How are you doing? Where can I help? You know, some of those kinds of questions, not help big, but help in small ways, you know, or offer support or whatever it is. I think it's so important. In Canada, there's been kind of this trend in communities. It is a doing trend, but it's that kind of, we call it caremongering, right? And it's really interesting to see in my local community how people have really rallied together, you know, to meet, to support each other as individuals during this time. And there's I think embedded in what I've observed of that whole process is a lot of compassion for each other and a lot less questioning about motive or any of that kind of stuff. It's just, you have a need, I can support you, we're going to come together in this way to be compassionate. I want to pivot a little bit now, and I know that when we chatted before, you were talking about really weaving in humor and play, and we've already talked on this in this interview around, you know, having fun with this, but also curiosity and empathy into, you know, the processes that you're working with and that you're leading. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the importance of those kinds of techniques or those kinds of ways of working, and why it's so important to consider, you know, bringing in those things into our work.
I find that a lot of the people I work with, and, you know, I teach at university, I teach 18, 19, you know, 20-year-olds at university, as well as, you know, all stages of life and career. And I'm really constantly struck and surprised by how hard people are on themselves. That often we set ourselves up such high expectations, and maybe I'm working with high achievers, I don't know, but I come up against a lot of people who constantly feel like they're failing. That you know, it's hard, it's never ending. You know, we're working long hours, we're never able to you know, balance, to have the balance that we want, or, you know, so there's this struggle that I come up against all the time, and I find it in myself that it's very hard to be grateful for what I have, or it's very hard to lighten up and find the joy in the little things. And because I take things so seriously, then, you know, I kind of almost like forgotten how to have fun, or I have forgotten that actually we can learn through fun. Learning doesn't have to be always hard. You know, and work in that context, you know, is filled with opportunities for surprises, for joy, for moments of gratitude. So it feels like we're so tuned in to what is not working, to what we're dissatisfied with, that and that's mobilizing us to do something. But at the same time, I feel like in my own life and also in my work, I want to bring the part that we often forget. And again, it's not a both, it's not an either or, it's a both and. Mm-hmm. So bring in a little bit of playfulness, and play. There's a lot of research to show that play is an incredibly powerful way for people to learn. So, you know, from a learning perspective and a teaching perspective, learning in an experiential way, learning through moving around, through engaging with others, through practicing something, not just talking about it, not just, you know, presenting information, but actually engaging in the work is the best way for us to learn. So I'm myself being challenged to work in a lighter, more playful, more spontaneous way, and that's something that I feel like the world needs as well. And if it may feel trivial, especially in the current situation, but I think that maybe this current situation has made us realize that no matter how small our world becomes, you know, no travel, being locked in, you know, we're here, lockdown situation in Melbourne, life continues, and you can still be useful, you can still connect with people, you can still be creative, you can still be productive. So it's really shifting that perspective around what is possible, rather than focusing on the limitations or the deficiencies of something.
Yeah, at Tamarack, we try to build in creativity into, when we're doing workshops and other kinds of learning. And it's interesting because it really does deepen people's reflections. Earlier today, I was leading an online workshop, and one of the tools that I shared with people was to do to look at your stakeholders and then to draw little images of each of your stakeholders. And as you're reimagining, re-engaging them, what that might look like. And I suggested to them that they should include pictures and fun kinds of activities in all of that. And I think it's so important to build those kind of moments of creativity or celebration, or as you said, gratitude in all of our work. This has been, Deanna, this has been such an interesting conversation in terms of really trying to navigate where we're finding ourselves right now. And also as we begin to think about, what's next, giving ourselves permission to maybe not know exactly what's next or not do things right away, but spend that time asking questions and leaning into that space. What are some final thoughts that you might have for the folks that are listening to this webinar? What are some nuggets of wisdom that you'd like to leave with them?
Well, look, I think this wisdom has been around for hundreds, thousands of years. And I think that we possibly could all agree that potentially some of these ideas are provocative, but mostly they make a lot of sense. And the challenge is not in knowing that we need to be more compassionate, for example. I think the challenge is in the practice of it. And so in the end, it does become an opportunity to practice, to do something different. And not just once, not just for today, but actually how do we make little adjustments, take little actions every day? The way you start your meetings at Tamarack, the practices and rituals you've developed to build a culture that is open, that's collaborative, that's creative. You know how long that takes with little steps along the way. And so my own challenge to myself and my invitation to anyone who would like to make a change in their lives is to take little steps. Take a little step today to make a commitment to one small thing that I'd like to get better at, whether it's be a better listener or potentially step on the balcony and notice small, or maybe see a person in your life with fresh eyes, or a problem you're dealing with. Maybe step back and think, well, what else am I missing? How could I be wrong? And so those little things, but practice them every day. Remind yourself that these are little steps, little habits that can be developed over time. So I'm not advocating for a quick shift or a transformation. Liz, as you know, you've been devoted your whole life to change and to collaboration. You know how long that takes, and it takes persistence. And so I'm really in awe of the work that you do. And I feel like, next time I need to interview you. I want to know how do you do your work? How do you maintain your resilience? How do you get up in the morning when it feels like, oh my God, it's such a, here we go again, right? So there's a lot to learn from the work you're doing. So I really feel very, very privileged to be having this conversation that's very much one way. Next time we'll have to go the other way.
Well, Deanna, I think we really benefit at Tamarack from the wisdom of thought leaders like yourselves and others. There's so much to learn and so much to kind of consider, and lots of different perspectives to consider. And so we really benefited as well from your wisdom, from your knowledge, from that idea that we don't have to know it all, or we don't have to do it all, that we can spend time in the space of not knowing and not doing. So thank you very much for joining us. We will let people know the links to both your website and to the two books that you and Stephen D'Souza co-authored together. just for the folks that are listening to the webinar, I spent the last 2 months every day in my check-in for my team, pulling a quote or a reflection from the Not Knowing book. And so every day I would read about a chapter in the book and pick out something that that really spoke to me and spoke to the, you know, what I was thinking about that day, and that kind of moment of reflection each morning really helped me kind of think about, okay, so what's actually happening here, and what role, you know, where am I contributing, or where am I holding up processes, and where can I pause and reflect? And so over the last couple of months, you've played a pretty prominent role in my life and in my team's life. And so I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate that.
Thanks so much. So thanks everybody for listening to the webinar today. Again, we want to thank Deanna Renner for sharing her wisdom with us. And Duncan will come on in a minute and tell you about some upcoming webinars Tamarack is hosting in the next little while.
Just before we get going, I do have a couple quick announcements of some learning opportunities that are coming up at the Tamarack Institute. The first is that we're continuing to do a weekly webinar series through the fall. So you can join us for free webinars like this one on a variety of topics such as engagement, evaluation, youth, poverty reduction, and much more. You can find more information about that at tamarackcommunity.ca. And we're also so excited about our launch of Foundations of Community Engagement. This is a brand new offering for us. It's a self-directed online course that looks to provide you with the foundational tools you'll need to complete a community engagement activity. You'll learn alongside Lisa Attakla, our Director of Community Engagement at Tamarack Institute, and she'll bring you through several different phases of what a community engagement activity will look like. And you can find more information about that at tamarackcommunity.ca as well. So in the next few days, we'll send you an email with a full recording of today's call, a collection of links and resources, as well as links to the opportunities I just mentioned. Thank you everyone for being here today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week.